Okay, I think we are 1 minute in. I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you again to everybody who has joined us. We're really excited to have this conversation with you. Again, my name is Maggie McGillick. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications and Brand at ACS Publications. As a reminder, this will be recorded and it will be available after the fact. So if you are unable to make the whole presentation, we will be sharing it after the fact. We really appreciate those who have sent questions in advance. There will be time at the end of our short presentation to submit additional questions. You can go ahead and do so through the written Q&A Zoom feature. To get us started, I'd like to introduce Dr. James Milne, President of ACS Publications.
Thanks, Maggie. Delighted to be here. My name is James Milne. Just to give a very brief bio, I've been in science publishing for over 30 years, and the last 7 of those years, coming up 8 years, is with the American Chemical Society. For the last 4 years, I've been president of the ACS, and across my goals is to ensure that we continue to publish the most trusted, most cited, and most read research articles for our community. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks so much, Jim. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Tegen. I am the Chief Publishing Officer for ACS, and I've been with the organization for a little more than 18 years, and I've got more than 20 years of experience in scholarly publishing. Before I came into publishing, I was a biologist at the bench, so I like to remain close to our researchers, as close as I can to the science. And for me, our vision to have the most influential journals in science and to be the first choice of every researcher is something that my team and I live every day, and I couldn't be more excited to be here talking with you a little bit more about our pathway for zero-embargo green open access. So next slide, please.
Thanks, Sarah. To provide an introduction for today's webinar, there's a number of areas we'd like to cover, which will, by way of introduction, which will take about 10 minutes. And then we'll have another 10 minutes on questions or comments received over the last couple of weeks regarding the Zero-Embargo Green Open Access initiative we undertook. And then we have continuing time for questions and answers received, questions received on the day. So if you do wish to ask any questions, use the Q&A function, and we'll get to as many of those as we can during the day. So to set the scene, about 7 weeks ago on September 21st, the ACS announced an innovative new approach to support a subsection of researchers being asked to publish open access. The approach was to recognize the investment and costs incurred by publishers to help make zero-embargo green open access a sustainable activity. Specifically, we announced the introduction of a charge to cover the costs ACS as a publisher incur, all the way through to our journal editors making a final editorial decision on a peer-reviewed manuscript. This then enables the author to freely post their editor-accepted manuscript in an open repository for anyone in any part of the globe to freely access and adapt that article as sought by numerous open access policies or mandates. Since our announcement, we've heard a range of positive comments and interest in the initiative, but we have also heard with some concerns highlighting aspects of the article development charge which maybe was unclear or misunderstood. So the purpose of this webinar is to provide a brief background to the introduction of the article development charge and to acknowledge and respond to some of those queries or concerns raised. The ACS is a long supporter of open access. We publish 16 fully open access journals, including Central Science, a Diamond Open Access journal, fully sponsored by ACS. We also initiated the launch of ChemArchive, the preprint server for chemistry, which is now co-owned and supported by ACS and 4 other leading chemical societies globally. We've also rolled out multiple options for researchers seeking to publish open access in any of our 85 leading research journals. And we do this through numerous read and publish agreements, of which there are more than 1,000 institutes covered globally. We've invested in automating the process to make it easier for authors to publish open access and to comply with funder mandates where that's applicable. And for a long time, we've had a free green open access option with the standard 12-month embargo. And before I move on, it's worth noting that discounts apply to 90% of the authors choosing to publish open access with us. So these options and services are helping to drive up adoption of open access across the chemistry community, and this we're seeing is growing year on year. Indeed, this year already, over 50% of all journal content from Europe has been published open access in our journals. So to wrap up on this slide, in summary, we strive to provide the best options for researchers to facilitate publication in our journals. And in doing so, we note individual research will be subject to their own particular environment, whether that is by country, by funder, by institute, or by personal preference. So providing choices makes really good sense here. So in order to explain a little bit about why did we introduce the article development charge, it's first worth looking at the open access landscape and recognizing some of the global perspectives in play. Europe has for many years strongly favored open access. And as I mentioned, over half the research papers we publish from Europe are now published fully open access, a percentage or proportion that is climbing year on year. And this is a real success story. In most cases, these authors are supported by institutional read and publish agreements, which cover almost all major countries in Europe. In the US is exploring engagement too, and the OSTP an announcement recently made where they asked funding agencies to draft policies to drive public access to published research and public access to associated research data is ongoing. The details of these policies have yet to be finalized, yet already we have over 400 institutes in the US covered by read and publish agreements, and we're trying to enable faculty to publish their best work in ACS journals as gold open access articles. Now, with this said, most other parts of the world have not embraced open access in quite the same way. And while we have rolled out read and publish agreements to engage and encourage open access adoption globally, there's still a real gulf between open access support when it compares to the likes of Europe. So returning to the rationale for our initiative, I'd like to take you back actually to a meeting that I recall in London that I attended in December 2018 with the founders of Coalition S. So at the meeting, there was Robert Jan Schmitz of the European Commission, Mark Schiltz, Science Europe, and David Sweeney from Research England. And they outlined the goals and aspirations for the recently formed Coalition S, with a strong, clear articulation of the desire to move to a fully open access world, where the final trusted version of record was immediately available to all. At the time, the option of green open access without embargo was positioned very much as a fallback, an option only for when the trusted version of record could not be made open access. Over the years, we've seen this shift, and we now see greater interest in green open access with the so-called rights retention strategy gaining favor as a route to immediate open access. And this has some concerns for us. Green open access relies on subscribers retaining subscriptions in full, which is something that is not completely aligned to the comprehensive transition towards open access and away from subscription publishing. So at ACS, we challenged ourselves to think creatively. Is there any way that ACS could support heightened interest and adoption of zero-embargo green open access in a way that doesn't undermine the very journals the author and scientific community rely upon? Could we find a solution to recognize and support the value and integrity of all the work undertaken in taking papers all the way through to editorial acceptance? So just as in 2018, when zero-embargo green was positioned as a fallback option, the article development charge route that we have just announced supports this fallback position, and it allows for the expansion of this option should it be favored across the community. And in today's environment, the new zero-embargo green option is designed for a very small number of authors who need to follow an open access mandate, but don't yet benefit from one of the many read and publish agreements in place. And just to give a context here, when we assessed how many authors might choose this route, we found it would currently apply to just 200 published papers from the over 200,000 submissions we receive each year, or 60,000 published papers each year. Which means for over 99% of researchers, submitting to ACS journals is not an option they are expected to adopt, but it is an option there for them should they choose to go that route. So with that, I'll pass over to Sarah to take you through some more of the introduction.
Great. Thanks so much, Jim. So when we introduced our additional open access pathway earlier this fall, we knew we were going to have some questions to answer, right? And you've been so gracious in submitting feedback to us in advance of this session and through a lot of other channels that we've seen. So really, first and foremost are some foundational questions about differentiating gold open access from zero-embargo green open access, and then differentiating an article publishing charge from our article development charge. And as Jim mentioned a couple of slides ago, we have supported authors who need to or want to publish open access with us through a number of different pathways for more than a decade. For us, reaching every single researcher who wants to publish with ACS journals is really important. Science is better when all voices can contribute. And I really, really, really love that commitment to inclusivity that we at ACS Publications have very much embraced. I mentioned when I introduced myself, right, that I came from the bench. And I remember what it was like to submit manuscripts and respond to editor and reviewer comments. That was a while ago, sure. But even then it was clear that managing submissions and peer review was a complex process. But as a scientist, I know that there's really nothing better than getting an acceptance letter and then seeing your research published in a journal that your community values. So let me move to the next slide and tell you a little bit more about the fundamental tenets that underscore the questions that have arisen. So definitions. Gold OA involves making the final published article, the version of record, immediately available online with no charges to researchers or with no charges to readers upon payment of an APC. And I can't stress this enough. Gold open access, freely available access to the version of record remains the preferred pathway of funders and researchers. And today, about 28% of our authors who publish with us through a gold open access pathway, either through a read and publish agreement or through a directly paid APC. Zero-embargo green is a little bit different, and it involves posting the editor-accepted manuscript in an institutional or subject matter repository immediately upon acceptance for publication and without an embargo. So under the zero-embargo green open access pathway, the final published article is available through subscription to the journal. And today, as Jim mentioned, less than 1% of authors are likely to utilize this pathway. It's a very, very tiny number. So nearly all authors who have to comply with a funder or institutional open access requirement are already covered by a read and publish agreement. So this ADC option doesn't apply to them. In both green and gold open access scenarios, we produce the final version of record, but this new green route will enable authors to bypass the embargo period and post the manuscript immediately once it's accepted for publication. The ADC option gives 100% of authors a compliant pathway to publishing with us. 100%, all authors. We want to be able to reach every single author who wants to publish in ACS journals. And again, this additional option is for that very, very small subset of authors who need to post the editor-accepted manuscript immediately upon publication and who aren't already covered by a read and publish agreement. And then for those authors who wish to deposit their editor-accepted manuscript to a subject or institutional repository, they can still do that for free with a 12-month embargo, just like they've been able to do for a really long time with ACS. If I could have the next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between the ADC and the APC. So the ADC covers all costs of publishing services leading up to the final editorial decision on a submitted manuscript. A large part of this cost relates to the editorial and review activities performed by the publications division and its academic editors, and it represents for us a really sizable financial investment. In the graphic shown here on the right, this relates to the 4 activities shown on the right-hand side of the donut, and a little over 50% of all of the expenses associated with journal publishing. Beyond the ADC, the APC covers those right-hand side of the donut activities, as well as final article production, distribution, discovery, hosting the version of record, and maintaining any critical post-publication updates. And I want to be clear, because this is a question that's arisen a couple times. Authors will never pay both an ADC and an APC. If the author ultimately desires full gold open access of the version record, they simply pay the difference between the ADC and the APC. As I close here on this slide, I want to reiterate what the ADC covers. It's based on the breakdown of those services that are provided up to the editorial decision to ensure the quality and integrity of our accepted manuscripts. These services include data verification and fraud detection, author support, community development, and maintaining and investing in the secure systems that support the myriad efforts of a vast global network of editors and peer reviewers that are required to maintain high-quality scholarly peer review. Essentially, right, the ADC aligns with the standard practice of paying for services that are sought, valued, and then received. So, Jim, I'm going to pass it back to you. We've got a few questions that have come in prior to this webinar.
Thanks, Sarah. And we really appreciate the interest and engagement from the community over the last couple of weeks on the introduction of the article development charge. We've received some really great questions, both about the intended process and the rationale for this option. And we're going to take this opportunity to respond to those questions that we've received in advance. And just as a reminder, use the Q&A function within Zoom if you'd like to add any additional questions. So moving to the first one, does this apply to all submissions? And I'm really glad someone asked this question, which I gather came up a few times at the Charleston conference last week. And I can see how this initiative may be criticized if it did apply to every submission made to ACS journals. And just to say, ahead of this webinar, we did receive a question from one of the registrants from Spain, who said, in addition to paying the APC to publish in open access, will it be necessary to also pay to deposit the article in the institutional repository? Sarah's touched on that. It's a similar but different question, but I'd like to respond to them both here. So the short answer here is the charge only applies if you are specifically wishing to pursue zero-embargo green open access and not any of the other publishing approaches which are currently applied to nearly all our authors. So the ACS will not levy, ask for, or charge the ADC under those workflows. And these are all listed here: subscription access, gold open access through 2 routes. And also there's the green open access with embargo. So in terms of the secondary question, just to repeat, if you choose to publish gold open access, either through a read and publish agreement or otherwise funded, the ADC does not apply here at all. Indeed, if the author starts down the green ADC route and then shifts to gold, the ADC paid will be offset against the final APC for that article. So if we could move to the next question. This again is a really interesting question, and I've seen a number of comments where it's raised as though we're charging for the services charging for the services we provide involves or impacts author rights in some ways. And there have even been suggestions that authors have to buy back rights as part of this. And to be clear, choosing the ADC route does not impact, alter, or influence author rights in any way. Specifically, the ADC does not grant or withhold rights. It is a payment for simply and solely the publishing services that we were providing as part of this option. So by choosing the ADC route, without intending to publish the final version of record as gold open access, we essentially sought to find a sustainable means to support authors posting their editor-accepted manuscript in a repository with the liberal CC BY license desired by so many institutes and funders. And if authors choose to deposit their editor-accepted manuscript in this way, by choosing the most liberal of the CC licenses, which enables anyone worldwide to distribute, remix, adapt, build upon the work, including for commercial purposes, this will naturally change the user behavior and usage behavior of articles worldwide, and including on our platform. Hence, ACS is simply seeking to charge for the services we provide and are highly valued as part of our quality publishing activities. So in many walks of life, it's pretty normal and accepted concept to do that. Okay, over to you, Sarah. I think you've got the next question.
Great, thanks. So we had a number of people who asked whether this is a submission charge and whether the fee applies to all submissions to ACS journals. And I'm really sorry that we weren't clearer in our original messaging. So the ADC, as Jim has stressed, covers the costs that are associated with the services that ACS Publications provide if and only if an author elects zero-embargo green open access as a way to satisfy their funder institutional requirements. And when an author submits a manuscript to us, we investigate their institution, their funders' requirements, and only if we see that they aren't already covered by an an institutional agreement and they've included some of the language around the rights retention strategy, do we ask if they are going to want to pursue a zero embargo green open access pathway? Again, this is a small subset of authors today who aren't covered by a read and publish agreement. And as Jim mentioned, it applies only to about 200 or so published articles out of the corpus of 60,000 published articles and 200,000 submissions. There's another important point here too, that the ADC only becomes applicable once the manuscript has passed initial vetting and editor scrutiny. In other words, once the paper, the manuscript is sent out for peer review. And this practice aligns with other open access publishers who apply their charges following an initial triage of submissions. And again, if authors want to publish at no cost to them, they may elect a 12-month embargo before posting their editor-accepted manuscript to an institutional repository, or they can utilize gold open access funds that are available to them through the institution in the form of a read and publish agreement or other similar kinds of agreement. Could I have the next question, please? Great, thanks. So this question is around zero embargo green open access and our subscription rates. And what I want to say here is that maybe not everyone on this webinar or broadly knows that ACS subscription rates are tied to usage of published articles, with usage banded into various tiers. And in calculating the usage for subscription rate purposes, all open access articles are specifically excluded from this count. In this way, the subscription is based only on non-open access articles, okay? But in addition, usage of zero embargo green open access of the editor accepted manuscript, which is accessed from an institutional repository, are not considered open access on our platform. And the usage of the editor accepted manuscript does not contribute to the usage on the ACS website. Right? This leads to diminution of usage of the version of record on the ACS platform. But the usage of the version of record will remain part of the subscription calculation and will be reflected in the rates, right? So we don't include the usage that isn't on our platform. And ACS has been very careful to separate the open access and subscription access usage in our platform to ensure that we aren't charging for the same services twice. So I hope that remains a little bit clearer. And the four main questions that Jim and I discussed so far cover the main thrusts of the questions and comments that ACS has received since announcing this new open access option. And on the next slide, you'll see that we have a number of other resources that are available. The links shown here, and I think we're popping those directly into the chat, but if not, you should be able to get to them from pubs.acs.org. We're also opening the floor for additional questions from the audience, and I know I've seen some questions popping up already. So let me go and take a look at some of those.
Yeah, great. Yes, and we also had some questions submitted in advance. So I encourage folks keep using the Q&A, but I have a question right here, actually, maybe for Jim or Sarah. Does this fee harm global equity in publishing?
Well, this is an area where ACS Publications is determined to provide an equitable path to open access publishing or any publishing for researchers. Researchers from countries that currently receive special country pricing for APCs in gold open access will also have waivers and discounts automatically applied to the ADC if they choose to publish the zero embargo route. So we're trying to do this through inclusive pricing and so forth. But we do have to recognize any form of publishing, whether it's subscription or open access, there has to be a payment mechanism to support the activities to ensure the integrity of the papers and the trust in the papers that are published. So just to reiterate, the discounts and waivers already applicable for gold open access in our open access journals will actually apply automatically to this green option to make that open. We're also making sure that there are free options to people as well. So all the existing free to author options remain. So we're trying to get the right blend here and supporting equity as much as we can going forward. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jim. This is somewhat related to, Sarah, the question that you addressed about the submission fee, but someone is asking if the ADC is refunded if an article is rejected.
Oh, that's a really great question. And I'm so glad that someone brought that up. The ADC is not refundable. It represents a payment for the services that the author has received in vetting, in research integrity checks, in peer review. What I can tell you, and I'm really glad that we've done this, is that if an author is rejected from one journal at ACS and they transfer that same manuscript to another journal within the ACS portfolio, and that happens pretty regularly within ACS Publications, the ADC is effectively reused, right? They aren't going to pay a second ADC.
Great, thank you for that, Sarah. Another question, kind of similar to something that you addressed, Sarah, maybe you could take this as well, is, where is ACS incurring additional costs to be covered by the ADC when an author is publishing in OA through the green route, if they're still if you're still profiting from the toll access of the version of record?
Yeah, thanks for that question. The ADC, like I said, applies to only a very small number of authors. And what we know is that the costs for maintaining a high quality publishing process with a huge focus on research integrity is a costly matter. And the ADC really accounts for only about half of our total costs, and really reflects all of the costs up to the acceptance of a manuscript. There are lots of things that we do beyond the acceptance of a manuscript that include the production of the manuscript, its distribution, its maintenance on our website, any critical updates that are necessary, and that's where that additional cost comes from. Does that help answer the question?
I believe so.
Thanks.
Jim, do you need any additional thoughts?
No, I think the other part just to mention is that, in case it's not clear, the ADC does not apply until after the manuscript has gone through the initial round of editorial review. So as with most publishers, our editors, usually two of our academic editors, will review manuscripts as they come in and make a call on whether those papers are likely to go get a chance of acceptance going through the peer review process. Part of that is to not overload the peer reviewers that are working so hard for the quality of the journals. So only those papers that have gone through the data validation, integrity checks, and the editor's first round review, then the ADC starts to apply. And it's only at that point that we then apply it. And that's how it filters the number that of relevant papers down at that point. So I thought I'd add that bit in.
Great. I have another question here for you. If the ADC is intended to cover the cost of peer review, then why aren't non-ADC paying authors charged this fee?
Okay, shall I make a start on this one? In every model that we have, the costs are covered in some way. So in the subscription world, those papers that 70-odd% of papers that are still in the subscription pipeline, the subscriptions cover these costs. In the gold open access environment, the gold open access fee covers those costs. This is an option for the green zero embargo green open access option. So that because we know that the usage of that content that is being peer reviewed, reformatted, and taken forward to the final manuscript, the usage will be in multiple places at this point. So therefore, the subscription revenue will come down on those articles because the usage will come down as well. So we're trying to balance it out. In the prior green open access environment, where there was a 12-month embargo, that 12-month embargo gave publishers the opportunity through the subscriptions to justify that they could cover the cost that way. So the cost is covered one way or another. It's just through the different mechanisms.
Great. We have a few more. I know we're almost at the half hour here, but we have just a couple more questions about the process. There's a question, somebody has said, Sarah mentioned that you will investigate which authors may need the ADC. Once you've identified these authors, will it be optional for them to select the ADC and zero embargo, or will the ADC be compulsory once you've identified the author?
Yeah, thanks for that question. You know, when we detect that an author may want to utilize this option, we go back to them. We have a dialogue with them and say, hey, we think that this is your funder requirement. Is that the case? And if so, are you aware that that the ADC will apply to you? Of course, the author always has the option at that point of saying, well, I'd rather do something else. I'd like to, you know, publish this under a regular subscription model, and I can use the 12-month embargo for free to be able to post my editor accepted manuscript into an institutional repository. So I guess what I really want to say is this is always an option for authors. There are lots of different pathways that they could pursue instead.
Maggie, could you repeat the question? Because there was something that went through my mind that I wanted to say and I've forgotten what it was. Could you repeat the question?
Yes. Once you've identified these authors, will it be optional for them to select the ADC and zero embargo, or will the ADC be compulsory once you've identified the author?
Sorry, I forgot what I was going to say and I've remembered now. So the zero embargo green open access option is not brand new. It's been around for a number of years. And along with other publishers, there's a challenge. And the question was, how do we make this sustainable? How do we make it work for the whole ecosystem that we have? And many of you who have read various blogs and articles will have heard of the phrase green via gold. And that's one of the mechanisms that up to now, pretty much all publishers, ACS included, have been adopting. And that's where if a researcher is being asked to publish zero embargo green open access, but they are part of a read and publish agreement where they get gold built into the subscription payments, we take them that route because it covers both. Gold kind of trumps the green. So in many ways, those papers are already being taken fast-tracked into the gold open access route, in which case the zero embargo green can apply if the author wants, but it's not becomes necessary. The rationale behind the article development charge is where if there's more authors that do not have the read and publish option or the green gold open access option, we want to give them an option that is sustainable for the ACS activities there to make sure that the quality of the journals remain high. So thanks.
Okay, great. I have one last question. It looks like coming from a funder, so really appreciate you joining us today. The question says, what proportion of manuscripts that are rejected are ultimately published in an ACS journal?
Sure. So what we know is that after a manuscript goes out to peer review, it has about a 70% chance of being accepted in an ACS journal. And that's before we even take into account any kind of transfer for mechanism. So we also know then that if papers with peer review are subsequently transferred to another journal, the acceptance rate is even higher. So what we're talking about here, I think, is whether there is a value for the services that are provided. And I think the answer is yes. There's the peer review that comes with a paper that allows the author to improve upon it, and then there's a great likelihood that a paper will be accepted either in the first journal it was submitted to, or then to a secondary journal that it gets transferred to. So thanks for that question.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Jim, Sarah, any final thoughts that you'd like to end on?
I'd just like to thank everyone for their rapid sign-up and participation in this webinar. This followed the Charleston meeting conference last week, where we were picking up the vibe that there were some questions, some misunderstandings maybe. What we're doing won't be there for everyone, won't be satisfy everyone, but we're trying to make sure that every author has a way to publish with publish open access with ACS. And we're trying to create those channels. And back to one of the earlier slides, there are multiple options about the way people can publish, depending on what whether it's their nation and their geography, their funder, their institute, and their personal preference. We want to make sure that we don't put barriers in the way for them in that sense. Sarah, do you want to add anything?
Just to echo what you said, Jim, we appreciate the interest in our new program, our optional program for authors, and we are committed to ensuring that every author who wants to publish with ACS has a way that they can do that. These are certainly changing times, and we need to respond to a changing environment. So again, we're committed to working with you. We've got a number of additional resources that you can look up, and if you've got additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us.
Yes, thank you all for joining us today.
Oh, Maggie, sorry.
Yep.
Maggie, last thing, I just realized that the recording of this webinar will be sent out. A link will be sent out in the next 48 hours to everyone that's registered for this, and that can be shared widely as well. So just thought.
Yes, I was just about to add that, and just to also let you all know that in addition to the recording, we're also going to be having an Axial blog post. I know that we ran a little bit over today, but we are striving to address all of the questions that you have submitted. So please be on the lookout for an additional Axial blog post, which will have the link embedded from this webinar there as well. Thank you all.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.